With New Year's resolutions, many of us will make a vow to eat healthier, and that's a good thing. But what about our beloved pets and their nutrition? Greetings, Naturopathic Dr. Dennis Black here, and I'm on a mission to provide better nutrition for cats and dogs because truthfully, all pet food is dead food, which is why we created Rough Greens and Meow Greens in the first place. We bring their food back to life with live vitamins, minerals, probiotics, enzymes, omega oils, antioxidants, and so much more. All in a tasty formula that your dog and cat will love. You can improve your pet's coat, digestion, energy, and have less vet bills. Let 2025 bring a new year and a new pet. Get a Jumpstart trial bag, normally $20. Get a 100% discount with promo code BESTFRIEND. You discover the shipping. Go to roughgreens.com, use promo code BESTFRIEND. Bring your pet's food back to life with Rough Greens. So good, your pet will ask for it by name.
Weight loss. It needs to be fast and sustainable. Noom GLP-1 starts at just $149 and ships to your door in 7 days. Take it from Marcos, who's loving his journey with Noom GLP-1.
I'm getting to where I want to be. I'm in such a good place right now, and I'm very confident that I'm going to be able to continue this weight loss, this journey, and really make a true lifestyle change.
Don't believe it? Take it from Cam, who's gaining more confidence with Noom GLP-1.
I really am starting to feel better. Like, I feel a lot lighter. I feel a lot happier. I feel a lot more confident. I just feel a lot more like myself. I don't feel so bogged down every day.
$149 GLP-1s? Now that's Noom Smart. Noom, the smart way to lose weight. Get started with Noom GLP-1 at Noom.com. That's Noom.com. Real Noom users compensated to provide their story. Individual results may vary. Not all customers will medically qualify for prescription medications. Compounded medications are not reviewed by the FDA for safety, efficacy, or quality.
Over the past 75 years, more than 10,000 chemicals have entered our food supply, but the EU allows just 300 additives. At Thrive Market, we prioritize quality, banning over 1,000 ingredients found in conventional grocery stores. Our Healthy Swap scanner helps you find better versions of your pantry essentials without the junk, dyes, or fillers, and everything is delivered right to your doorstep. So shop at a grocery store that actually cares about your health at thrivemarket.com/get started for 30% off your first order and a free $60 gift.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. If you email me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our show, be sure to check out our Patreon. Go to Opperman Report Patreon. And everything you hear Monday to Friday on AM/FM radio, you can find over at Patreon with all the ads and the commercials cut out. That's Opperman Report Patreon. We do a live show every Friday night at Spreaker.com. All the shows are there, like 4,000 hours of shows are over there on Spreaker. Do a live show there every Friday night, 8 p.m. There's a chat room, get an email notification when new content comes up. And like I said, 10 years worth of shows, plus I play repeats all the time too as well. I got a fascinating story here today. If you remember Tommy Morrison, Tommy the Duke Morrison, they used to call him, as a matter of fact, he was like the Great White Hope back in the 90s, okay? Which was an old, how racist boxing was back in those days. And he was even in the movie with Rocky. I think it was Rocky V. And then they declared that he had AIDS, but we're talking to his widow, Trisha Morrison. Now, you could find her at the website, TommyTheDukeMorrison.com. She's on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Tommy Trisha Morrison. And there's a film coming out called I Am Tommy Morrison that'll be coming out in 2025. So, Trisha, are you there?
I am, Ed. Thank you very much. I'm here.
No, thank you so much. So before we get into Tommy Morrison and his story, tell us about yourself. Who is Trisha Morrison?
Yes, of course. I am, first of all, the wife and widow of Tommy Morrison. But a little bit about me, I was born on the Cape Verde Islands, which were an hour off the coast of Portugal. I was actually brought up in the UK and South America. And my mother was from Holland, from Amsterdam, and my father was from Argentina, South America. And I always worked in tourism in the UK, Spain, Italy, Austria. I spent most of my winters in the ski resorts and the summers in the islands of Italy, like Elba and Sardinia. I don't come from a boxing background. My sport was tennis. and lacrosse, which I played for the county in the UK. And then I also went on to play junior Wimbledon in England and then carried on to coach it. So I came out to the US, to Los Angeles, and worked at the British Tourist Authority selling the UK to Americans. And my father actually was with the British Embassy in Washington, D.C., and that's how I got my green card legally. It took a few years, but that's how I became legal in the U.S. And then I opened up my own tour company in the U.S., a big ground operations company handling tourists from the U.K. into the islands of Hawaii, California, cruise ships into Vancouver, Florida, and Vegas, Las Vegas. And in 1996, which I always now call it in my interviews the scene of the crime, I was in Vegas, and that's when I first got to hear about Tommy Morrison. As I mentioned, I was never involved in any boxing. I never even watched Rocky V. As you mentioned, yes, Tommy was Tommy Gunn in Rocky V. So I was never a groupie, Ed. I wasn't one following him around. Then eventually I moved to Wichita, Kansas, in the middle of nowhere. Back in 2001, I actually did a paralegal course, correspondence paralegal course, which normally takes 3 years. I did it in 2 months. And I also worked for a historic hotel as the sales and manager, and became also part of my own tour that I put together was the historic Flapper tour to save the hotel, which was in bankruptcy at the time. And we saved the hotel, got a $24 million historic preservation grant, and that's where I met Tommy Morrison finally in 2009 in Wichita, Kansas. So that's a little bit about me.
What a cool life. So you're still in Wichita, Kansas now?
Currently, yes, I am.
And all these wonderful places you've been to, you wound up, you're happy there in Wichita?
Well, there's an airport here, Ed, so if I'm not happy, I can always fly out, right?
Okay, you're not in custody. Okay, Trisha Morrison's not in custody. Okay. Oh, boy.
Right.
So then how did you meet Tommy?
So in 2009, Tommy was invited to an event called the Riverfest in Wichita, Kansas, which they have every year. And I saw his name on my rooming list. Being a historic hotel, I tended to have a lot of VIPs stay there. And one thing I always used to do was Google everybody's name. So I've had George Foreman stay there and quite a few other celebrities. And I Googled Tommy Morrison, and I'm thinking, oh, no. This is the Tommy Morrison that I had to deal with in 1996 in Las Vegas when I was bringing in tourists, couldn't find a hotel room to put them in because of this fight that in the end never happened. So I'm Googling Tommy Morrison, and I'm thinking, do I put him in the best hotel room or the worst hotel room? Because everything I kept pulling up, Ed, was bad stuff. It was drugs, DUI, HIV, AIDS, everything. And I thought, okay, well, he's here, and maybe I'll get a chance to tell him what I really think of him and how he ruined tourism for me back in 1996. So that's how we got to meet.
And why don't you tell the audience, describe his boxing career?
Well, when I delved into his boxing career, and he made me actually look at all his VHS tapes because, as I mentioned, I wasn't into boxing. Didn't really know who he was and what he had achieved. But I always mention again in my interviews what he did achieve, because people seem to forget, because the number one thing with his name is always HIV/AIDS, is that they forget what he actually achieved. And as an amateur, he actually started boxing at the age of 7, and he trained on his front porch with his dad. And his amateur record actually is 290 fights with 21 losses. 263 of those fights were knockouts. So he began boxing at the age of 7. And then believe it or not, at the age of 13, he retired from amateur boxing and he went into tough men contests. And I'm not sure if you know, and I didn't really know, that you have to be 21 to be in tough men contests. But at the age of 13, he went in there and he had 50-1. He lost one tough men contest. And basically that was to earn money to support his family. And then at the age of 18, he retired from tough men contests, which is before you're even supposed to enter into tough men contests. And at the age of 18, between the months of March and October, he won the Golden Gloves in Kansas City. He won the Western Olympic Trials. He won the PAL Championships in Florida. And he lost a split decision to Ray Mercer, who he ended up fighting later on and being part of the most brutal knockout in the history of boxing. And then at the age of 19, Ed, that's when he turned professional. And his ending record was 51-3-1, which meant that he only lost 3 fights, and those were two pretty good boxers, right? And as you mentioned, you're always one punch away from winning or losing. And then he won 2 titles, which was the WBO in 1993 and then the Razor Ruddock fight in 1995. So that's what people should be remembering Tommy by, Ed, and not this whole HIV/AIDS debacle.
Oh, yeah, incredible talent. This kid had incredible. I was a huge boxing fan back in those days, too. I was always down in Atlantic City watching all the fights back in the 80s and the 90s. And his career ended because there was a drug test, and they said that he had AIDS. He was HIV positive.
Well, actually, it wasn't a drug test. And in fact, they never drug tested him on February 9th and 10th in Las Vegas in 1996. What ended his career and his life, basically, was on February 10th, 1996, when he was called into someone's room and he was told, Tommy, you've got HIV, let's get you out of here. The fight's canceled. You're not going to be fighting. That's how that happened to him on February 10th, 1996.
And who was that? Who called him into the room?
Okay, it was a gentleman by the name of Tony Holden, who has a history of being with Tommy throughout his career from about 90 to obviously 96. And Tony Holden was never under a signed contract with Tommy ever throughout Tommy's boxing career. But for this particular fight in Las Vegas, it was the first fight of a multi-million-dollar contract that Tommy personally had signed with Don King. But also, throughout the 11 years that I've been doing my due diligence since Tommy passed away, I find out that Tony Holden also had his own individual contract with Don King.
So the people who told Tommy Morrison that he had AIDS were his own people that he trusted.
Yes.
But
and we're not physicians or medical experts in the field of virology or microbiology, and there was no lab report.
Well, then, at the time, didn't he say, well, how do you know I have AIDS? How was I tested? I didn't go to the doctor.
You have to remember, he was 26 years old, just turned 27. And he was told that he had the deadliest virus in the world.
Right.
So, you know, at that age, to be told that you're going to die before you get to your car, which is basically how he always kind of says it, or used to say it, he didn't question very much. Under deposition with Tony Holden in the lawsuit that I eventually filed, Tony Holden was questioned. Well, you know, did you see the results? No, I didn't. Did you question what tests were done? No. So, yeah.
Okay, now what about the venue where the fight's going to take place? This is a big money operation. they must have wanted to see some kind of proof because there's insurance companies that cover things and like this. Was there insurance payout on this?
It's a very good question, and nobody's ever actually asked me that. It was set to be at the MGM Hotel in Las Vegas, which was the largest hotel in the world at that time.
Yeah.
And there's no mention of that. But when I did my due diligence for the court case and found out, first of all, that the boxing licensing law, was actually not passed by the legislature in Nevada to even draw blood and test for HIV, I also discovered in the minutes of the meeting, Ed, that they were kind of questioning, canceling a boxer's fight at the last moment. How should they, pursue this in future because of the Tommy Morrison situation? In other words, they canceled a boxer from fighting about an hour or 2 hours before the fight. And of course, by then you sold the tickets. So you're right. Whether there was an insurance thing, I haven't actually delved into that side of it.
Okay. Well, then, who's handling the lawsuit?
Okay. So when Tommy passed away in 2013, it was September 1 at 11:50 p.m. 2013. They asked me if I wanted an autopsy done.
Right.
And I said yes. I said, because they said that he had HIV in 1996, and obviously people are going to say he died of AIDS, because obviously you progress from HIV to AIDS and you have to have a reason for death. And I want you to draw blood and extensively search for the virus. Do a post-mortem pathology report for me. So the facility, which is a really very good facility in Nebraska, which is where he passed away, the University of Nebraska Medical Center, which is one of the largest facilities, in fact, for epidemics, pandemics, Ebola, HIV, AIDS. They drew Tommy's blood and extensively did a pathology examination. And on September 17th, over 2 weeks later, they came back to me and they said he was negative for HIV, and they did not find the virus. And there were no AIDS-defining diseases either in Tommy. So that's when, Ed, I contacted Vegas, and I contacted the physician who supposedly did the testing on Tommy. And his name is Dr. Robert Boy, really nice physician. And he was a certified physician by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. And I contacted him and I said, hey, you better have good medical malpractice insurance, because, you diagnosed my husband with HIV in 1996. And when he died, he didn't have HIV. And through his attorney, who is named, he was a counsel in Vegas, and he then emailed back on December 23rd, 2013. His name is Counsel Morrison. He emailed back, it is important for you to understand that Dr. Boyd did not diagnose and never has diagnosed Mr. Morrison as HIV positive. And for any doubters of that, you can actually find that in docket 283, page 28, line 14 to 15. So I thought, okay, so if the physician didn't diagnose him, who did? So I tried to get an answer out of the commission. I tried to get an answer out of the lab, the test kit companies, and certain individuals that were obviously involved at the time, either through media exposure or actually on site at the time, and nobody would give me an answer, Ed. So I flew to Vegas and I tried to find an attorney, and I don't know if you know Vegas that well, but...
With New Year's resolutions, many of us will make a vow to eat healthier, and that's a good thing. But what about our beloved pets and their nutrition? Greetings, naturopathic Dr. Dennis Black here, and I'm on a mission to provide better nutrition for cats and dogs, because truthfully, all pet food is dead food. which is why we created Rough Greens and Meow Greens in the first place. We bring their food back to life with live vitamins, minerals, probiotics, enzymes, omega oils, antioxidants, and so much more. All in a tasty formula that your dog and cat will love. You can improve your pet's coat, digestion, energy, and have less vet bills. Let 2025 bring a new year and a new pet. Get a Jumpstart trial bag, normally $20. Get a 100% discount with promo code BESTFRIEND. You just cover the shipping. Go to roughgreens.com, use promo code BESTFRIEND. Bring your pet's food back to life with Rough Greens. So good, your pet will ask for it by name.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/audio.
Every attorney that I approached said, hey, we live in Las Vegas. Our children brush shoulders with children with the district attorney general's office. We don't want to ruffle any feathers. Also, statute of limitations. We can't take your case. So I thought, well, wait, my husband died in 2013. This is still 2014. I have a year in which to file the case. And, nobody's wanting to help me.
Yeah, but what's the cause of action? It's a misdiagnosis from back in 96, right?
Well, the cause of action was who and with what diagnosed Tommy Morrison with HIV/AIDS that kicked him out of boxing on February 10th, 1996.
Right.
So that was my complaint. So in the end, I filed it. pro se. So I went from there. And
you're suing this Dr. Robert Boy?
No, actually, I never mentioned Dr. Robert Boy. When I did my due diligence before starting the lawsuit, I ruled out people that openly said, I didn't diagnose him. So he was never a part of the lawsuit. What I should have done in hindsight is added a few John Does or Jane Does.
But who's the defendant? Who's the defendant in this lawsuit?
Okay, so the defendants that I named were Quest Diagnostics, which was the lab at the time, a Dr. John Hyatt, who was mentioned in media outbursts, by a Dr. Margaret Goodman, who is in charge of VADA now, the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association. And then there's Mark Ratner, who was in the commission at the time, who's now part of USC, and the Nevada State Athletic Commission. Those five entities, 5 individuals, those are the 5 I sued. So after 10 years, Ed, and literally I filed it in federal court, district court in Nevada, and then appealed it in the Ninth Circuit Court, took it to the U.S. Supreme Court, back again to the federal court, back to the Ninth Circuit Court, back again to the U.S. Supreme Court, based on new evidence and some newly disclosed evidence in testimony. All 5 defendants confessed and admitted in interrogatories, requests for production of documents, requests for admissions, that they never diagnosed Tommy with HIV. So my whole cause of action, who diagnosed Tommy with HIV and with what, all of them responded, we have no evidence of HIV. We did not diagnose him with HIV. So that is what came out of the lawsuit.
But then, but wasn't there a period of time when he was trying to get his license reinstated, where he was going to different states? What were they hanging their hat on? They must have had some kind of paperwork that said he had HIV.
Yeah, absolutely perfect question, Ed. And again, nobody's asked me this question. So to carry on with the lawsuit, there is an exhibit, TM, as in Tommy Morrison, 0015, which was filed by the commission itself in this lawsuit as part of the disclosures, right? Initial disclosures at the beginning. And it's dated, it's a document dated July 11, 2006, where the commission is contacting a company in New Jersey called Fight Facts, which is or was in charge of suspensions, because on February 10th, 1996, they indefinitely worldwide suspended Tommy from the sport of boxing, okay? Which meant that every commission then worldwide never accepted Tommy Morrison again.
Right.
But July 11, 2006, in this document, it says, please change the suspension on boxer Tommy David Morrison, date of birth, and it gives the date of birth, on the federal suspension list, so he was on that, from his pre-fight medicals done February 10, 1996. Under comments, license denied. So essentially on July 11, 2006, they lifted his status of suspension due to his pre-fight medicals and marked it down under license denied. So what did the other commissions have when Tommy tried? First of all, there was a 10-year period where Tommy didn't want to box. He was trying to keep himself alive.
Yeah.
You know, he thought he was going to die every day. So boxing was not in his mind. But so coming back to your question, what did the other commissions have in their files? They didn't have anything, because the actual lab report, which is not the test result, Ed, there's a difference. There's a lab report which is generated by people in labs inputting stuff, data, compared to an actual lab result. So none of the commissions had that, right? They didn't have anything, because that did not appear until the lawsuit in 2014 as another initial disclosure. So and they didn't even have this July 11, 2006 document that is an exhibit TM0015, which would show that basically they turned it into a license denied. Now, if you deny a license, it's only denied for a year, and then you reapply for it. So nowhere on here does it say anything about HIV. And not even Tommy knew about this, because this only came out in the lawsuit, and the media still have not come out with this, that his suspension got lifted 10 years later. That's 10 years of his prime. If you're into boxing, you'll know between 26 and 36, that's your prime.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Despite all the career that he's had in boxing, that's still your prime.
Yeah, and this kid was so talented, man. He's such a handsome guy, too. Star quality, had everything going for him. You'd think that back then in 96, there would have been 100 lawyers running around trying to help him to get his license back. He didn't have that kind of pull?
No, he didn't.
Okay, so he's 26 years old, 96 in February. They tell him you got AIDS, right? And we got to leave the hotel. Let's get the hell out of here, basically. Now, what happens then? Does he go see a doctor and seek treatment for this? He just finds out he has AIDS. Is he seeking treatment?
Okay, so my due diligence on paperwork and everything, and obviously having spent time with Tommy, and also listening to some of his recordings, and also reading some of the stuff that he wrote in his own paperback books that he brought out. What happened on February 10th, 1996, Tony Holden said, quick, let's get you out of here. The media is swarming.
Right.
Okay. So question there is, why is the media swarming already when you're supposed to not tell the media what's going on, or they shouldn't know what's going on until the so-called patient or boxer has been told what he's got? But the media's already swarming. And remember, Ed, I was in Vegas, so I got to hear that he had HIV on February 10th, 1996. So, all this about trying to confirm he had HIV, no, it was already a done deal out there in Vegas that he had HIV. So he was flown out of Vegas to Tulsa, and he was to undergo other testing. Now, due diligence again in this lawsuit, there is no test result from any physician in Vegas showing that he had HIV in Tulsa, again, between February 10th and February 15th, where he stands up, Ed, at the Marriott Hotel, a press conference that's arranged by Tony Holden for Tommy to stand up in front of people with all these cameras. It goes out worldwide. I have just been told, or Tommy always used to use we have just been told that I have definitely tested positive for the virus. And he's there on his own at the podium, actually with Tony Holden standing next to him at the podium, telling the world that he's definitely got HIV/AIDS. Well, I can't even show you a test result for that period of time that would even confirm what Tommy was saying. And if you listen to his words carefully, he had been told. He hadn't been shown anything. First of all, he hasn't seen a lab report from Vegas and still hasn't seen a lab report in Tulsa. And then the media come out with certain things. Oh, he's in hiding. He's being tested again. His blood's being drawn and sent to the CDC. So again, my due diligence, Ed, is I followed the trail. I even contact the CDC. Okay, blood was drawn, before the press conference. It was sent to the CDC. Can I have a copy of the results? And the CDC turned around to me, in the last few years and go, what are you talking about? We never received any blood. We don't have any results. So there's no results in Tulsa. And if you go back and look at the press conference that Magic Johnson did, he stands next to his physician, Dr. David Ho, right, and makes this huge, press conference, but he's got his physician next to him. Well, supposedly, Tommy went also to Dr. David Ho after this press conference that he did in Tulsa, but not even Dr. David Ho has the test results for that. And during the lawsuit, Dr. David Ho's office send a document, but they have it under seal in Nevada and won't release it. And so I said, why?
With New Year's resolutions, many of us will make a vow to eat healthier, and that's a good thing. But what about our beloved pets and their nutrition? Greetings, naturopathic Dr. Dennis Black here, and I'm on a mission to provide better nutrition for cats and dogs because truthfully, all pet food is dead food, which is why we created Rough Greens and Meow Greens in the first place. We bring their food back to life with live vitamins, minerals, probiotics, enzymes, omega oils, antioxidants, and so much more. All in a tasty formula that your dog and cat will love. You can improve your pet's coat, digestion, energy, and have less vet bills. Let 2025 bring a new year and a new pet. Get a Jumpstart trial bag, normally $20. Get a 100% discount with promo code BESTFRIEND. You discover the shipping. Go to roughgreens.com, use promo code BESTFRIEND. Bring your pet's food back to life with Rough Greens. So good, your pet will ask for it by name.
Hi, and apparently because in fear that I would sue Dr. David Ho. Well, why would I do that? We've released all kinds of test results throughout this lawsuit. Why are we keeping this particular test result secret from Dr. David Ho? And why did the Judge Richard F. Boulware II in Vegas, who happened to be the fourth judge, by the way, on this case, the other three recused themselves, why would he not unseal that test result or piece of paper that was filed by Dr. David Ho? So that remains sealed there. So, that's what happened in Tulsa. No proof of evidence of HIV/AIDS there.
Okay, but in your conversations with Tommy, when he went to Tulsa, did he visit a doctor there?
He apparently had blood drawn by an EMT, and again, we don't know where those are. Okay,
that's okay. But now, if you're 26 years old and you find out you have AIDS, especially at that time, it was terrifying. Even if your neighbor had AIDS, you were terrified, okay? Because there was no cure, there was no hope,
Yeah.
So did he seek treatment ever in his life? He must have been treated for AIDS, right? Because he at one point he founded an AIDS advocacy foundation, right?
He started that, yes. So coming back to the treatment side, Tommy then started to dig and research, why is it every day I get up and I'm not dead, right? Why is it I'm not showing any symptoms? And then, the doctors down there, through Tony Holden, Tony Holden actually would take him to the physicians, and based on Vegas's diagnosis of HIV, the doctors obviously were prescribing Tommy medication. And, Tommy at the time, sure, he took some medication, but then in the end he said, I'm doing my research and the side effects of the medication are the symptoms of the disease. And he would keep repeating that. So he stopped taking them. And in an interview that I post regularly on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, he says openly, 3 doctors have sent him home to die because he won't take the medication. And he kept telling them, but, it's not doing me any good. And in fact, later on in the years, after Tommy passed away, there were some huge lawsuits on these medications where they found that they were harming people.
Okay, so Tommy Morrison was under the care of 3 physicians who were prescribing him AIDS medication.
Yes.
So then they must have made a diagnosis he had AIDS.
No, they didn't.
Well, then you got a lawsuit there. I'd sue them too. Did you name them in the lawsuit?
I didn't mention them in the lawsuit. I didn't mention each individual one. And in fact, when the media started coming out with all the stuff, for example, like ESPN, there's Elizabeth Merrill. She came out with something in ESPN.com, and then they came out with their own little documentary on Tommy. They said, and I'll read what is really troubling, Ed. ESPN.com article is dated August 23rd, 2013. Tommy Morrison's latest big fight since February 10, 1996, when the Nevada Athletic Commission said Morrison tested positive for HIV before a fight, the 44-year-old has spent most of his days dodging the diagnosis. Okay, now bear in mind this is a week or so before Tommy died, but they're saying he's been dodging the diagnosis that was made on February 10th, 1996. But throughout this lawsuit that's taken 11 years, as I keep mentioning, no diagnosis was ever made in February 10th, 1996. So when you look at another physician in Tulsa or wherever that Tommy might have had, some dealings with, they go back to the diagnosis made in February of 1996 in Las Vegas. That's what they go back to. There's a difference between, a doctor making a diagnosis and a doctor putting on a lab report or notes in his file, history of HIV, okay? History of HIV would lead you back to February 10th, 1996. And as this lawsuit has confirmed, no diagnosis was made in 1996. In fact, there's a court document, Ed, docket 174, filed in the court of law on June 8th, 2016, 20 years later, that says plaintiff, which is me, now recognizes that neither the state defendants nor the Quest defendants ever diagnosed Mr. Morrison as carrying the HIV virus. Plaintiff additionally agrees with the defendants that Mr. Morrison was never diagnosed with the human immunodeficiency virus in Las Vegas in February 1996 by any of the defendants. So here we go. If the lab didn't diagnose, which they don't anyway, if the state defendants, which is the commission and all the doctors involved, didn't diagnose, if the actual physician that did Tommy's physical in Vegas did not diagnose Tommy, then there was never a diagnosis made in Vegas to have kicked Tommy out of boxing in 1996. So coming back to me suing all the physicians, yeah, but I will tell you that not one of those physicians will come back to you and say that he ever diagnosed Tommy with HIV, because the diagnosis came from Vegas.
What was this big fight that he lost? What was that big? What was the payoff on that big fight?
You mean the one from February?
Yeah, the one in February that he was. It was his big fight. How much is he going to pay on that fight?
All right, so that was the first of a multi-million-dollar contract.
Gotcha.
So Tommy had signed with Don King in September of 1995 before he lost to Lennox Lewis, right? So he had already got the agreement in place with Don King. Tommy was self-managed. He did not have a manager, so therefore he was self-managed, and his promoter became Don King.
Right.
So the idea was that Tommy would have 2 or 3 fights, and then he would come up against Mike Tyson. So the first fight was February 10th, 1996. On the agreement that I have, which was actually produced by Tony Holden's attorney, Stuart Campbell, it shows that would have been $150,000 against a fighter called Arthur Stormy Weathers. And that would have been the first fight. Then there would have been another fight against somebody else, and then another fight against, say, Larry Donald for $450,000. And then Tommy would have fought Mike Tyson, because it was a 3-fight deal. And Mike Tyson, you have to remember, was just coming out of prison, right? So Tommy knew that he would beat Mike Tyson. And so the contract with Don King was the fight with Tommy against Mike. Whoever won, there'd be a rematch, and then there would be a third rematch, right? So it was over 30. You'll hear Tommy say $38.5 million contract. It would have been in the end. So there was a lot of money to lose. But what's really interesting, Ed, was that the very first opponent for this multi-million-dollar contract was against Stormy Arthur Weathers. And this was a fight that was supposed to take place on February 10th, 1996. Well, in documents, again, in this lawsuit, the defendants include a document which is a letter from Stormy Weathers' manager and a script from Stormy Weathers' own physician saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't fight in the fight coming up on Saturday because I've got rhinitis, and you can't fight with rhinitis because when you get punched in the nose, that's it, you can't breathe, you could die," and all that sort of stuff. So he was never even planning to fight on February 10th, 1996, based on these documents that appear in court. But the weigh-in takes place anyway. So you've got Don King that knows that, Tommy's opponent is not fit to fight based on his own physician. You've got the commission that knows, because they're the ones that actually produced this document in court. Tommy never knew about it. And so you suddenly got, well, why didn't Don King find a replacement? Why didn't Don King postpone this fight until after Stormy Weathers was better? None of that happens. They go into a weigh-in on February 9th, and you see the nice photo shoot of Don King holding up Arthur Stormy Weathers' arm, Tommy's arm, but never looking Tommy in the eye, right? And you think, what's going on here? He knows that his opponent can't fight, and then boom, the next day, guess who is medically suspended and kicked out of boxing for life? It's Tommy.
Okay, so if the theory is that test was mocked up, right? It was a fake test. The diagnosis was it never happened. What then is the motivation for that?
The motivation for the test, well, just looking at the lab report that was produced in this lawsuit, it was QDI1, and everybody can pull that up. And again, I posted openly, and you can get it in court records. I posted everywhere on social media. So the test report that was printed and shown for the very first time in 2014, just because of the lawsuit, shows Dr. Robert Boy as having ordered the test. Well, Dr. Robert Boy said he never ordered the test, never drew the blood. It shows that Tommy Morrison
just to interrupt you for a second, but assuming that the test, the diagnosis is fake, what would be the motive for making this diagnosis, this fake diagnosis, to get Tommy's license pulled?
Well, it's a very good
who benefits
question.
from that?
Well, there's a few theories out there. I mean, it automatically canceled the contract between Tommy and Don King.
Okay,
automatically canceled the contract, right? Don King never had anything further to do with Tommy at all. Mike Tyson coming out of prison, did Don King not want Mike to fight Tommy? Was there really a threat that Tommy would then be, and as much as he hated it, the Great White Hope, he hated being labeled that. That was the media. That wasn't Tommy. He wanted his abilities to be based on his abilities, not on his color of his skin, as he kept mentioning. But that automatically, the one benefit was that contract became canceled. Now, what's really interesting is there was nothing further to do with Don King and Tommy Morrison as of February 10th, 1996. But what's really interesting is in November of 1996, guess what? Tommy's back in the ring in Japan, right? Fighting for money for his AIDS foundation, which he put together. And you've got the people that were in his corner for the February fight out there with him. You got Tony Holden, who's the one that told Tommy he had HIV out there, and you've got the trainer and whoever else. So basically, the one thing that really happened was that the Don King contract immediately got canceled, and Tommy lost all that money, and that's it.
Oh, okay, so $38 million. That's nothing to sneeze at. So Tommy must have been bitter about this, or at least it must have been on his mind during the period of time you were married to him. Did he have any kind of theories? Hey, this guy put the screw job on me in order to screw me. Did he have a theory? Did he talk about it?
We talked about it every day.
I bet.
HIV became a household name. As I mentioned, people didn't really look at him based on his career. They based it on HIV. They wouldn't even get 6 feet close to him, right? They stood away from him. They didn't want to touch his hand. He went through huge depression. I mean, huge depression. You've got to think we've just lived that again with COVID, right? How many people were not allowed to be visited in hospital or seen people die, because of being isolated. His whole life from that point went into despair. He turned to drugs, heavy-duty drugs. He turned to DUI. He went wild. He would say, if I'm going to die tomorrow, I'm going to fill a void. I'm going to go cocaine and meth. And he did all that. And he explains that all in his book called My Darkest Years that he put together, which was very therapeutic for him. But he got that all out of his system. And then we did talk a little bit about stuff, but you've got to remember that all the stuff that I'm kind of telling you, he didn't even know about. He'd already died in 2013. So, this lab report, the cancellation of the Don King contract, all that sort of stuff, matching it all up, he didn't know any of that. Coming back to Don King, though, when Tommy was imprisoned in the 2000s because of a DUI and cocaine and finding firearms in his car, which he still, to the day he died, said they were not his firearms. They were planted in his car. He said that the FBI actually came to him in jail and said, we can get you out today if you give a scoop on Don King. And so I asked Tommy, I said, well, did you? He said, I wanted to get back into boxing. I knew that I could still be the greatest heavyweight champion out there and I could beat Mike Tyson. And he looked at me and he said, I actually didn't know anything bad on Don King. So, who was to blame? He did around 2010, Ed, have a meeting with Tony Holden and in Tulsa to try and find out more about what happened that day. You've got to remember that, between 1996 and 2009, he was totally spaced out of his head. He was on drugs. He was on drink. But when I got to meet him, he sobered up. He had the most sober years of his life, and he did drug rehab successfully. And that's when his feelings and memories started to come back, and he started to ask questions. Well, where is the lab report? Well, who is the doctor that diagnosed me with HIV? And he had all these questions, and all the answers are what I'm finding out in the lawsuit that I was in. So he never actually blamed anybody for what happened. He kept saying it was a misdiagnosis. They made a mistake. Don't they realize they made a mistake? And nobody can show me my virus. Why can't I see the virus in me?
Okay, we're talking to Trisha Morrison. She's the widow of Tommy the Duke Morrison. They got a website called TommyTheDukeMorrison.com. You can find Trisha at Tommy Trisha Morrison on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And there's also a movie coming out called I Am Tommy Morrison. So keep an eye out for that. Now, you bring back so many memories, because I was such a fan at this time. I remember that press conference, the one in Tulsa where he was at that big long table, there was a table, right? He was sitting at a table for a while there, right?
Yeah, he was mainly at the podium, but the family you'll see the family
Gotcha.
all in tears, yeah.
Yeah. And also, too, there was such a stigma about AIDS, too, because the homosexuality, like everyone was speculating, Tommy Morrison, he must be bisexual, he must be gay or something like that. But there was no indication of that?
No, not at all, no. And, obviously there were times when he said, everybody thinks I'm gay, I'm not gay. Right, and then they come out with, he's promiscuous, got all these women. So he couldn't win. The way the media portrayed him, he could not win.
And now, what about you? You were married to him, right? Did you guys take precautions to avoid the transmission of possible AIDS?
We met in 2009. We got engaged before that, and then we married in 2011. And no, we did not. We had normal sex just like any normal married couple.
Gotcha. And what was the cause of death when he died?
On the death certificate, it's cardiac arrest, and he had heart surgery about a month before, and multi-organ failure. Right. He was actually put into a medically induced coma 48 hours before and never got out of that coma. Septic shock and septicemia. One thing that people don't know is that in 2011, he was involved in a sting operation in Tennessee, and he was thrown into jail under a sealed felony fugitive warrant of arrest. And after 30 days of jail, he came out with what was an insect bite to the side of his chest. And he had to have surgery on that infection on the side of his chest. And the surgeon left 12 foot of surgical gauze in Tommy's chest for 8 days to rot. And it was discovered after we came home. The surgery was supposed to be a 1-hour surgery. We actually, Ed, parked in a 2-hour parking spot at Knoxville Hospital in Tennessee, and we didn't come out for 8 days. And it was about a a good 7-8 hour surgery. They took out major and minor pec muscle. He'd also had stupid implants put into his chest at one point during his darkest years, well before my time. I would never have let that happen. And they took out one of those implants. And when the home health nurse came after we came out of the hospital, I saw a little piece of thread hanging out of his chest because she was supposed to just change a 4x4 bandage on the side of his chest. And I said, no, there's still something in his chest. There's a little piece of hair sticking out. And she said, no, this is all I've got on my test requisition is to come in and change this bandage. And that's it. And I said, no, there's something in his chest. And so we got a huge magnifying glass out, and I still have that. And she saw it, and she started to pull on it. And out came, out of Tommy's chest, 12 foot of tightly packed surgical gauze that had been left in his chest. And the nurse nearly passed out. I had to handle her, and Tommy's friend had to take care of Tommy. And as tough as he is, and you remember seeing him in that brutal fight against Ray Mercer, right?
Oh, yeah.
You never saw him cry, not even in the ring, right? You know, even against Lennox Lewis and Michael Benn and Ray Mercer, you never saw Tommy cry in the ring. Well, he cried as they pulled out that gauze. And that night, you know, and all the home health nurse did was she just put the new bandage on there, and she took out the gauze really quickly, like super quickly. I called the surgeon. I said, what did you do? You know, you just left 12 foot of gauze in my husband's chest. He said, oh, I'm sorry. And that was the end of that conversation that night. He didn't say, oh, let's get him back in the hospital. None of that. That night, Tommy, being strong as he always was, but that night his right leg gave way, his head went straight to a wall, broke the sheetrock, and he fell on his neck to the ground. And we didn't know until about 6 months later he paralyzed half his voice box. And that was why he had difficulty eating and talking after that accident. And that was the beginning of his downfall, Ed. It had nothing to do with HIV/AIDS. And coming back to that felony fugitive warrant of arrest, they, when I pursued that, they actually canceled it. You know, they stopped that case, and it was basically an $80 unpaid fine from South Dakota from 2006. And I ended up paying that $80 unpaid fine. That was the end of that. But this is how it all happened under a sting operation.
Wait, what was the nature of that sting operation?
What was the nature of it?
Yeah.
I had flown to Wichita that day. So obviously this was pre-planned. I was out of Tennessee, and when I got back that night, I flew back into Knoxville Airport, waited for Tommy. He didn't show up. In the end, I had to rent a car to go home. He still wasn't at home. And obviously, you know, with Tommy Morrison, you know, you call the police, you know, have you found him? And they said, yeah, we've got him in jail in Sevierville. And I said, well, why? What has he done? And they said, well, he's under a sealed felony fugitive warrant of arrest. We can't tell you. And so I couldn't even bail him out. It was all sealed. Anyway, after him being extradited to Kansas, that's when I bailed him out and actually got to speak to Tommy about what happened that day. And he had gone to Walmart in Tennessee, in our hometown in Pigeon Forge, and a lady came up to him, and she had bags in her arms, and she said, quick, I've got to get to the courthouse. Will you give me a ride? And Tommy, being friendly, he said, okay, yeah, jump in. And so he drove her to the courthouse. And when he got to the courthouse, which was just like 10 minutes away, she jumped out, and he never saw her again. And 5 cop cars surrounded him, and they said, you have a warrant for your arrest. And he said, no, I don't. You know, I know nothing about that. And they said, yeah, you do. And they took him into jail, into custody. That's how that began.
And this was an out-of-state $80 warrant?
Yes, it was from South Dakota.
Okay.
And when I actually spoke to the police in South Dakota, I said, why did you even do a felony fugitive warrant of arrest, a sealed one, for an $80 unpaid fine? And they said, we know nothing about that.
Now, since you've been speaking about this, how about like this fellow Tony Holden? Has he had any kind of opinion upon your theory here?
Well, Tony Holden and I really don't get on very well. I guess maybe because, I have tried to pursue it with him, saying, who's the physician that told you that you could tell somebody that they had a deadly disease? And I don't get a response from him. I actually got a cease and desist from him last year, stopping me doing interviews with people like you, Ed, and bringing out all the information that I found. And it was Tony Holden, along with ESPN 30 for 30, that brought out that documentary that everybody goes by. Literally 164 million people that I know of have seen it on YouTube, I think. And that's where I'm made out to be a delusional person, right? Purposely. I mean, I wasn't even invited by Tony Holden or anybody to the premiere of something on my own husband. So, when I found out that he had had an attorney contact me about a cease and desist, I looked a little bit further into the attorneys that he was using. And I noticed that they were representing Tony Holden on a $2.1 million embezzlement case that was filed by the Peoria tribe in Oklahoma on a casino that he had been managing. And from what I understand, I believe that the case is now closed and Tony Holden is living in Bali now. So I don't really have much contact. I'm sure that he'll probably listen to this interview.
And you're saying that this ESPN documentary makes you out to look like a... What word did you use?
Delusional.
Delusional. Okay. Well, clearly you're not delusional. Okay, but and why is that? How do they come to that conclusion? How do you come to that conclusion that they're making you look delusional?
Well, it's not me coming to that conclusion. It's every time people mention me, oh yeah, we saw her on ESPN 30 for 30, and she comes across as really delusional and in denial and a gold digger and wanting her citizenship from Tommy. And it carries on and on and on like that, right? So, so as I'm fighting this lawsuit and gathering all the information, yes, they are trying to sidetrack my findings with bringing up character assassination attacks on me. And it's starting to stop now because people realize that I have concrete evidence, and basically I'm the messenger giving everybody what documents they can find themselves and information directly from the physicians and the test kit companies. So I think a lot of people now realize that was kind of a hit job on me.
And if you go on Wikipedia, Tommy's mother also seems to think he has AIDS. And why would she come to that conclusion?
Yeah, that's right. And they also mention that. So what I come up with in interviews and what can be found on court records is you've got an antemortem from Boston, Massachusetts General Hospital, okay? And it's properly done. It's done by a pathologist called Gunlauger Peter Nielsen, MD, who is an expert in the field of virology, microbiology, has studied, 30 years, found no viral inclusions, fungi or bacterial forms at all in Tommy Morrison. And then you've got another exhibit, which is done by the University of Nebraska Medical Center, where you've got a proper chain of custody.
No, Trisha, I understand that. We have a postmortem. We have that. But why would she...
right.
She doesn't accept that? Like, how would she come to this other conclusion?
Yeah. So what my whole point is we've got the antemortem, we've got the postmortem, which are neither mentioned in any mainstream media writings or even in that ESPN 30 for 30, versus what the mother said. That makes no sense. The mother has got bless her heart. She's an 80-year-old little old lady. Bless her heart. She has no qualifications in the medical field. Why would she not be happy that her son did not have HIV/AIDS? It blows my mind. And why do people mention that his mother said he has AIDS rather than saying...
But my question is not, clearly she has a different opinion, different than the postmortem, okay? But you don't have a relationship, a conversation with her? When's the last time you've had a conversation with her about her son?
My last conversation actually was probably via text, and I would say it was, I'd really have to look at the definitive date, but it was about 2-3 years ago, right, when she texted me, and she in fact did an interview for World Boxing magazine, stating that she realized that false positives do occur, and it could well have been steroids in his system. So that was the latest communication, right, that I ever had with her. But everybody keeps bringing up stuff from 2013 before Tommy died.
Yeah. And in the pre-interview, you mentioned something about Fauci, that Dr. Anthony Fauci is involved in this?
Yeah, correct. Well, as everybody knows, with HIV/AIDS, Dr. Anthony Fauci was there right from the beginning of the AIDS era in 1984. So when I did my due diligence, I turned to the FDA to see which testing was approved by the FDA. I turned to the CDC. I turned to CLEAR, which is the organization that handles all the labs. And I turned to Fauci to find out, okay, in one respect, the mother thinks that Tommy has AIDS, but as far as physicians and as far as the definition of AIDS, what does it mean? How do you have AIDS? And since 1984, science and Dr. Fauci dictate to have AIDS in humans, you must test positive for PCP, which is pneumocystis pneumonia, Kaposi sarcoma, which is KS, and CMV, which is cytomegalovirus, right? Those were the criteria from the 80s if you had AIDS. And in fact, lots of people, millions of people all over the world, were diagnosed with AIDS if they had tested positive for those three things. So as part of my due diligence, I pull up records from, example, Jessica Kozel, MD, on the 9th of July 2013. She tested Tommy for Kaposi sarcoma. It came back negative. I also pulled up Dr. Lely, who did testing on Tommy on the 3rd of August 2013 for pneumocystis carinii, which is the PCP, came back negative. And I pulled up also a record from Dr. Heasty Scott, and that's dated the 8th of May 2013. The CMV, which is the other AIDS-defining disease, that came up negative as well. So that's where Fauci comes in.
And what is the status of the lawsuit right now?
Well, the lawsuit got closed.
Yeah.
It went to the Supreme Court, and it was just before Roe versus Wade came out. And as you probably know, or maybe not know, is that they only accept a percentage of all the ones that are filed. I was lucky enough to have got through to actually being part of conference day with the 9 justices twice. And it got closed down. What I wanted is I had found a piece of evidence, biological evidence. It was a piece of tissue that still exists to this day at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and it exists in perpetuity, which means that they will keep it forever. And I wanted the defendants to test it as a final, okay, let's test this for AIDS diseases and HIV. And then let's wrap this up, right, and get this out in the media. Let's even video it. And it got shut down, right? It did not become one of the 1% of cases. But following up, I still didn't give up, Ed, on that. I had found that the defendants actually had in their records, but had not submitted it in court, that tissue had already been tested. And it had already been tested before Tommy had died, and it came out negative for Kaposi sarcoma, which is one of the AIDS-defining diseases. And they had withheld that from the court.
Trisha Morrison, what is your goal here? What are you trying to accomplish? Just that people know that the stigma of having AIDS, is that it? Because the guy had plenty of health problems and a rough life, you know? Like, what difference does it make whether he had AIDS or not?
It made a huge difference to him. Okay. You have to understand that Tommy never wanted to let anybody down. He loved boxing. He never wanted to be associated with HIV/AIDS as a disease in him. He got told he was promiscuous. He got told he was gay. He got told he was useless and that he ruined his career. Well, none of that happened, you know, and it was very important, even to his last breath, that I promised to him, it was a deathbed promise, literally a deathbed promise, that I would find out what happened on February 10th, 1996, and who was responsible for it, because that is what he wanted. And he wanted to bring out his own movie, his own documentary about how he lived and breathed his life. And that's going to happen too. So basically, Ed, I'm fulfilling all his wishes. And this is one of them, and I've succeeded. What happened on February 10th, 1996 was basically a nothing burger, as they say, right? And he was never diagnosed with HIV/AIDS. But it's just getting that out there to the public because his life has been ruined by the media. And some are willing to get the truth out, some are still hesitant. And the ones that are hesitant are the ones that have been spreading what they thought was the truth.
Okay, and then as far as this interview now today, is there anything I haven't asked you that you want the audience to know?
I think we've been pretty much thorough. I think that we just need to keep getting this information out. I don't know if we want to tell people, but I did it, and I'm going to say it. Why not? I did an interview, and one of the comments was they were reviewing, right, the interview that I had done. And they said Tommy was a complete victim of conspiracy in every conceivable way. And I think they were being sarcastic. And then they said Ed Opperman couldn't even answer this woman's call. So I am so grateful that you did call me, Ed, because anything is possible. And what's getting out there is the truth. And I thank you for helping me.
No, thank you. It is an interesting story. And Tommy Morrison, man. Handsome kid, man. What a talent. This kid was strong as a bull, you know, and fought some of the great names. I remember even Stormy Weathers, man, was a good fighter, you know. Didn't he beat Foreman?
Stormy Weathers?
No, Tommy Morrison.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he beat George Foreman, who has remained an absolute wonderful guy and such a supporter of Tommy. Really nice guy.
Now, that's interesting. Foreman would know the gossip behind the scenes there, what the motives to screw with his license. Have you talked to him about that?
Not really. That hasn't come up, no.
Okay. That's I like to hear some dirt on Don King. Trisha Morrison, thank you so much. Once again, TommyTheDukeMorrison.com is the website. Tommy Trisha Morrison. That's the screen name on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. A film coming out called I Am Tommy Morrison. Trisha Morrison, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed.
Good night.
Good day.